Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Elephant. My name's Julian, and I'm joined, of course, by my co host, Anthony. Anthony, hi, how are
Hello,
you doing?
everyone. Hi, Julian. This is Anthony.
Good to hear from you, Anthony. How are you doing today?
I had a good day today. I had a long day at work, but it's good, and it's a cold day here where we are in this undisclosed corner of the world. But at least here, it's cold here.
Hint,
Oh, I
hint.
also just came back
It's
from vacation. Yeah,
Oh, where'd you go?
so
Where'd you go?
I went to Mexico City.
And they still
Yeah,
let you back
uh,
in the country.
I was a little nervous coming back to the States, and the agent did look at my passport for a little longer than I was comfortable with.
Hmm.
But everything was fine. Yes, I was let back in.
That's
Yes.
good. That's good. I
Mm-hmm.
actually
Mm-hmm.
also recently went to South America.
Mm,
I won't say where, but
sure.
we had like a surprise. It's never happened to me before, but one
Mm.
of the times when they're like, "Sir, can you step out of line?" and we have to do like
Oh, it's happened to
surprise
me.
check of the
It's happened to me a
bags.
while.
It's happened to you.
Not
Well,
for
I'm
not
surprised. It's never
yeah.
happened to me.
Hasn't happened
So
for
that
a
was
while.
interesting.
It happened in the George Bush era for me.
Yeah,
Yeah, after 9/11, yeah, I was in college, so I was a younger guy, and I did look a little bit, I
yeah,
mean, you could
and that
see it on
was,
camera. Yeah, you can see it on camera. I look a little ambiguous sometimes.
and that was, I think, part of your radical youth era,
Oh,
right? So,
totally. Oh, yes. Actually, that's a good segue for today's topic. You know,
yes, yes, that is a perfect segment because today we'll
yeah.
be talking about young men in
Hmm.
America, why they're becoming more conservative in the last election and possibly more radical in their thinkings about other aspects of typical
Yeah.
American
Now,
life.
Julian, are you going to disclose your age here on the podcast? You don't have to,
I
but
will not disclose my
yeah,
age, but I
me
will
neither. Me
say,
neither. Yeah.
I will say
Uh huh.
that in some demographic categories, I can still be considered a young man.
That's
So this
exactly what I
is,
was going to say, Julian. I am literally pushing the envelope on what it means to be a young person in America. I think I have a few weeks left of
that's
youth.
good to know. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, this is definitely a conversation that's pretty near and dear to me because it's a little
Mhm.
bit of like a self report, but it's also something that I think actually had to wake up to, which is surprising because as someone who's pretty politically engaged, I'm really
Mhm.
surprised that it took me so long to realize that there's this huge demographic shift in terms of young men's voting habits within the past, I would say, year or two. We're not even talking like 5 years. But yeah, within the past year or two that I really didn't wake up to until I was watching the second season of The White Lotus. And we can get into that later.
Sure.
But I was kind of watching that season being like, wait, what is this show saying about young men? And
Mm.
why am I only realizing this now?
I guess entertainment really is the window to
Yeah.
society, to
Yeah,
the
totally.
mirror. Yes,
But I want to start
interesting. I am
off.
halfway through season 3 of White Lotus, so and
Oh boy.
that also has a
It
lot of
only,
yeah, on masculinity and young men. I haven't
yes.
gone to that scene yet, but I've heard about it, of course. I haven't gotten there yet, but my God, it is. No, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's totally, totally. I was looking at the data. Young people, not just young men, but there was a slight shift in young women towards the GOP, but nothing
Mm,
compared to the giant shift from young men to the GOP. So,
yeah.
especially in the last election. So, there's definitely I think it also snuck up on a lot of Democrats. I do think.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely.
what do you think?
Yeah, well, I want to start off with some statistics
Mhm.
because I really want to set the stage for this in that this, huge disclaimer, this is not about not acknowledging the problems that young women face, right? Or that women face in general, which you and I are both pretty liberal people and we've grown up, I think, our whole lives hearing about how much there's a gap between men and women in terms of a number of factors, whether it's wages and ability to just exist in the world.
And I think that's an
But
important place to start because whenever you bring up, issues that men face, boys face at school, um, I think you do get the message does get portrayed as, oh, let me, world's smallest violin is going to come out, right? Or
yeah.
or like Cry Me a River, right? And I think that is obviously not the right way to go about this, to go about talking about this. That it
Hmm.
is not a dichotomy, right? It is not a,
Hmm.
um, you know,
Zero
only
sum
one,
game.
yeah, only one baby must live, right? No, this is we can they can both coexist, and I do think that the Democrats in particular did ignore young men and young men's issues to their peril. And while, like you said, this is not, I mean, we're two men talking about men's issues. And so there is, I can read the comments already saying, you must, hate women or you must ignore women. Like, no, no, no. I do think that that part of the problem was because this type of talk is discouraged, and this type of discussions they're cooled, right? Like you don't want to talk about this until it's a problem right now, right? And then we want to talk about it. But there's been problems before, right? This election, right? And young men have been feeling lost and maybe talked down to, scolded by the general discussion of the way we talk about young men and boys. I do have a question for you, but finish what you were going to say.
Yeah, totally. So I want to start out with a couple statistics here that I think illuminate the problem. If you're not familiar with what exactly is the problems affecting young men, here are some. Your experience, we're seeing now that women are increasingly graduating college at higher rates than young men. This isn't necessarily a problem if it's like 49% to
Mm-hmm.
51%, but
Hmm.
the suicide rate for men is 4 times higher than that of women. You have one half of teen males now report that they've never dated, whereas that was twice as high in previous generations. The fact that they were dating, not the fact that they weren't dating. Friends, 30 years ago, a majority of young men had over 6 friends. Now it's about half of that. Young men report having half of those amount of friends. 15% of young men say they have no close friends at all. And in 22 of 250 US cities, women are now over earning their male counterparts, including large cities like New York City. Um, so those are some pretty, I think, important characteristics and maybe surprising when you actually look at it from a lot of categories that matter to people. There's you can always find a statistics where one underserved group may be overperforming the the overperforming groups. That's kind of cherry picked, but these are pretty important data points to a person's life, like the amount of
Yeah,
friends you have, your ability to
yeah,
like date and find a significant other, your college attainment rate and earnings. Once I started to see some of these numbers, I kind of started to wake up to the fact that, wait, yeah, men actually, especially young men, are going through something that we haven't really seen before, which is that they are underperforming their female counterparts in very important aspects of their lives.
yeah. And to put a number on the mental health issue, I think it's 40,000 more suicides a year.
Wow.
And that, I mean, that's an epidemic, right? And we hear a lot about the loneliness epidemic, right? And you when you put together, right, all your statistics, And I'm not saying this is the average American person, the average American
Mm-hmm.
man, but we're trending towards more isolated, less educated, and earning less, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of that points to, and I'm not
No, say
saying,
it.
I'm not
This
saying,
is the elephant.
I'm not saying that young American men are an oppressed minority. They're not,
Yeah, yeah.
but they're showing they're showing symptoms of oppression, right?
Right, right, right.
And this is not, this goes just beyond white men, right? This is
Yeah.
just American men. And I would, I'm not a social scientist, but I would wager that these are higher among people of color, right? Men of
Mm-hmm.
color. So I would imagine that the graduation rates are lower, that the earning potential is lower, right? I would also wager that maybe we have more friends as people of color because we tend to be more social and more community minded. But I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
More research needs to go into that, right? Listen up, grad
Mm-hmm.
students. Here is some good, but yeah, when you have enough of your peers and with these pressure points, this is societal pressure, and this is how it looks like, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our brethren are succumbing to that pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
it might not be suicide, but it is going to be a hardening sort of your views. And you're going to be more susceptible to the, oh, yeah, I am the victim. And those that don't look like me are to blame, you know?
Yeah. And I think this was something that the folks on the right figured out much earlier than folks on the left, that they could capitalize on this social isolation and feed the darkness within young men to satisfy their own aims. And you see sort of people talking more about the manosphere, which is like a collection of media, podcasts, YouTube
Mm-hmm.
channels, what have you, that are heavily geared towards men and advocate everything from, how to improve your life economically, socially, romantically, physically. Like, they cover a full range of topics, but the manosphere kind of gets a reputation of being, kind of fringy, far right, and very conservative. And I think that it started to make total sense to me why young men were buying into this, because you're socially isolated. You're spending a lot of time online, probably. You don't know that anybody feels the same way you do. And in that isolation, you're searching for like companionship. And then there are these guys that come along and they're like, hey, you know why you're lonely? It's because women have more power now than they used to. And they're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, they definitely do have more power now than they
Yeah.
used to.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And so you have, what's this guy? What's him? Andrew Tate, right? Who's
Mm-hmm.
constantly advocating, like, the secret to your problem is that you train women to be more submissive, or like,
I do want to talk about the three people that I see as like,
sure. Yeah.
uh, Andrew Tate is one of them. Jordan
Mm-hmm.
Peterson's another one, and then
Mm-hmm.
the Trumps, the Elon Musks. So I
Mm-hmm.
think these four types of people are
Mm-hmm.
sort of now on like the Mount Rushmore of lonely men in America, right? And do they do get their cues from these four people? And look, I mean, we're not disclosing a lot about you and me on this podcast, Julian, but I am a gay
Sure.
man, right? That I
Yeah.
will disclose. um, um, and so I think my perspective is a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't really understand, obviously, the appeal of Andrew Tate, right? So that doesn't speak to me at a biological level, but I have heard of what he says, right? And it's a little horrifying to me that is striking a chord. And I don't have any personal friends that listen to Andrew Tate, but I do know that I have friends that teach school, and their students know who Andrew Tate is, and
Mm.
they listen to him. I believe he was a video gamer at one point, and then he became sort of like, I don't know, and now he has all these opinions about women, and he's being prosecuted for rape. And I'm very confused by the Andrew Tate-ness of it all, but I do know that he's a big influence. And so, yeah, what do you know about him?
Yeah, I think I just watched some YouTube clips, so I'm not going to say that I'm the foremost expert on Andrew Tate
Mm,
or the entire manosphere, but I do see I think I see the appeal in how men that are living in a world that doesn't necessarily see them or acknowledge their concerns that much feel compelled to go to the lowest hanging fruit of people that recognize that their lives are demonstrably worse than those of their fathers and grandfathers at this stage in their
mm,
lives, right? At the comparable age, right? Like their fathers and grandfathers probably had homes and
yeah,
careers and wives by the time they were 30. And a lot of young men now don't have any of those things at the time that they're 30. And they feel like they're falling behind. They feel like that the American dream is out of reach for them, and they're searching for a reason why. And it's very easy to provide a scapegoat, whether that be women or immigrants or people of color or gays, or as to and I think that's a lot of what this trans thing is about. I don't think it's
yeah.
as much actually about how much people care about trans people. I think it's that they see trans people as a threat to masculinity and a
Well,
threat
it's
to like
if
seeing
you
men.
frame it if you frame it as a certain way, yeah, a trans man or a trans woman is the farthest thing from a biological man, right? That's if you and I think this is a good point to introduce Jordan Peterson because
Yeah.
I don't know how much you are familiar with him. I'm a little bit more familiar with him than the rest of them
Yeah. Well,
because
let's educate our listeners on.
yeah, yeah. So he's a Canadian psychologist, and I became aware of him way, 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 way back. I think before Trump, as Trump was running the first time, and we have a mutual friend, and he introduced me to Jordan Peterson, and he was this psychologist that he was famous. He first rose to fame for having these long sort of seminars on motivation, right? Self motivation, and to get
Mm-hmm.
people, but especially young men. He calls, he really clocked what we're talking about today. He said
Right.
that young men are scolded. He believes that the term toxic masculinity is a slur and should not be used anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, in recent times, social scientists that study this phenomenon have also agreed with that the term toxic masculinity actually did more harm than good, and that by now we should probably rethink saying it to young boys, right?
Yeah. If I
Especially,
could do a
yeah,
tangent real quick,
yeah,
I
sure,
think
sure,
that that's something that I always kind of struggled with a lot in college, was that there was this term toxic masculinity, but
right,
there was no alternative, right? There was no
mm,
positive masculinity
right, yeah,
route to go to. So it created this like implicit understanding that all
right,
masculinity is toxic in some way, shape,
exactly,
or form.
exactly.
And there was no way to be like a man that was contributing positive things to society.
Hmm.
So I don't know. What are you left to do? Adopt femininity? Well, that doesn't feel right to me. That
Yeah,
doesn't work for every man. And I think that that's I can see why social scientists came to that conclusion, because I think when we
yeah,
think of the word masculinity in today's context, toxic is the first word that
totally.
people associate with masculinity.
And to I want to get another tangent about like soft masculinity, and maybe a lot of social science. I really like the Beatles, for example, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people think that the reason the Beatles sort of exploded in the 60s
Mm.
was that they were sort of version of soft masculinity, right? They had long
Mm.
hair, they spoke about love and played the guitars. They weren't, all in your face with their masculinity like Elvis or somebody. That's, he's very
Mm-hmm.
hypersexual in your face. And that American girls were looking for an alternative to sort of the rock and roll in your face American boy. And in coming these four sort of cherub looking but soft British lads, and they took everything by storm. So this idea that like yeah, masculinity is a scale, and when portrayed or when given room, right, to be a scale, society will take it, right? But anyway,
Mhm.
back to Jordan Peterson. Um, and we can return to toxic masculinity, of course, because that is in itself an interesting and important topic. But he sort of exploded onto the right wing's fame when he challenged a Canadian law that mandated the use of pronouns in Canadian universities, right? And he's like, "I'm not. You're not going to make me call anybody anything." Goes against free speech, right? And so he sort of became a right wing darling around that time. Really, just dug into this idea that young men today had been scolded to within an inch of their lives, that they had been scrubbed of meaning, and that they needed meaning uh,
Mm.
in order to succeed, right? And so he has this whole book called 12 Rules to Life, and he developed a roadmap on how men and young men could sort of find meaning in this postmodern, feminist hellscape that he sort of described.
Yeah.
And it was a lot about self-reliance and old school sort of, not just American, he's Canadian, but old school sort of conservative thinking
Mhm.
of what makes up a man, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, it was. Now that I look back on it, I did listen to a lot of what he was saying because yeah, it was wrapped in the psychological but also intellectual sort of verbiage, but it was also very accessible, right? And so
Mm.
his seminars, like a lot of people showed up to his seminars, and he was becoming a rock star. Um, and it was and but as the years went by, yeah, his audience tended to be whiter and more male and more conservative leaning, right? And that became his core audience. And I think because no one else was speaking to them. And
Yeah.
and and I think that's why he's so compelling. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a good summary, and why how the void and the lack of being seen is really, I think, the first sin of the left in terms of what they've done wrong in terms of addressing this problem with young men. I've had this
Mm,
conversation offline with people about like what needs to be done. I was like, well, the first thing that we need to do is acknowledge that there's a problem. It's say, hey, yeah,
mm,
we understand that young men today are actually going through it worse than their fathers and grandfathers, and
mm,
in some metrics worse than their female counterparts, right? Not
mm.
all metrics, not most metrics, but some metrics. And once you start to see them, I think you diffuse a lot right off the bat. Once they realize that you understand that they have pain, they start to listen to you a lot more. And so I think you're starting to see this more appear in media. I mentioned the second season of White Lotus is like my sort of flashpoint of seeing it, but I know there's this new TV show, Adolescence, that's come out that's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
even more directly addressing young men's social isolation and its connection with like radical violence. Uh, and so I think Hollywood is now starting to pick up on this and now starting to actually tell these stories, which I think is good. Um,
Mm,
and so that's one thing. I also think it's worth making an argument about equality between men and women, the sake of both men and women, right? And I don't like what I mean by that is that we've often talked about feminism, about like how feminism helps men, right? Sorry, how feminism helps women, but
right.
feminism also helps men, and people might find that counterintuitive, but like I can give you some
Sure.
examples. So I was having a conversation about watching some reality TV shows, Love Is Blind, and how one of the contestants on Love Is Blind was complaining about her partner because he was too short, and she was like, "Oh, he's too short, and I don't think I'm attracted to him
Interesting.
anymore because
Yeah.
we had the big reveal, and he was only 5'9" or something like that. And,
Mm.
I
Love is blind, but it carries a measuring stick.
yeah, the secret tagline of
Yeah,
the show.
yeah, yeah,
My favorite branding for the
yeah.
show. And I was discussing the show with one of my cousins and how frustrating it was that women these days are now talking about like men's heights uh like so superficially, right?
Alongside with their salaries. Yeah, it's their salaries and their
Yeah.
heights. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like I grew up in an environment where it was like you couldn't like talk about like a woman's breasts, right? Like you couldn't talk
yeah.
about
Mm.
like that would be like you would be fired if you had that conversation. But like people can talk about like men's heights and so on. I was like, yeah, there's like this toxic femininity happening around. And my cousin who I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to was like, well, it's not really toxic femininity. It's just toxic masculinity being said by women. And I thought about that.
Mm.
I was like, you know what? She's actually right. Like
Mm.
men have been ragging on each other for their height for like probably way longer than women, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that you can even think of like Trump on the stage of Republican debate being like calling Marco Rubio little Marco, right?
Right.
Like he's
Or
the
the fact that
first,
he's 6'2", yeah. Yeah, there's
yeah, or
no
the
way
fact that
he's
he's
6'2".
6'2", yeah.
Yeah.
So like
And 220
men
pounds.
kind of invented the whole height discrimination thing, and I think that now we're just seeing that women are have the actual power to kind of jump on the bandwagon in some
Mm.
senses. So I think that's like one small example of how uh, combating patriarchy and like supporting femininity actually is beneficial to men, even though we think that it's mostly about benefiting women. I
Sure.
don't know if you have any thoughts on that,
No,
Anthony.
no, that's interesting. Maybe it's just like toxic humanity, you know? It's not just
Yeah, right.
this idea that I mean, look, again, I am not straight, but when it's when I hear my girlfriends talk about like, oh yeah, he looks great, but he's like 5'6",
Yeah.
it strikes me as very it's like you're being so evolutionary about this, like you're being it's almost it's and I feel you're being kind of crass about like um about something like, yeah, so your biological desire to procreate and to have the best possible offspring is showing a bit, yeah.
I think it's like offspring, but it's also like attraction, I guess, is centered around high.
I
And I'm
think
not
it's
a woman.
offspring.
It'd be great to have
I think it's biological, but I don't
a.
think you say that part. I'm not gonna tell you guys how to be straight, because what if, like, yeah, what if, yeah, like, oh, he's great, but like, he has brown eyes, and I really want my baby to have a shot at green eyes. Like
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
that would be a little eugenicsy. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but you're right. Apparently, height is fine. That's fair game.
Height is fair game.
Yeah.
I
Which
see it on
look,
dating profiles. Like,
that's
I see
true.
people like, yeah, swipe left if you're below
Wow.
9 or
I
five
mean,
ten,
that's
and
that's just
and
another
I'm
thing.
like,
Yeah,
what? Like, that's crazy to me. I
yeah.
don't know.
You might as well
That
have
to
like
me
a,
is like a little
yeah.
bit crazy. I
You might
can't
as
imagine putting like male equivalent on my dating profile and being considered like a civilized person.
no Irish need apply.
Well, I don't think I would go that far. I don't think I
No,
would
no.
start
I
going
mean,
race, but,
I think
but
it's
like any
similar to
other
that.
physical
It's.
characteristic,
I mean, sure, sure.
yeah, yeah, I do agree that it's not dissimilar.
Yeah,
But
it's a little bit on that same, again, eugenics
because it's something
sort of
totally outside
way.
of your control.
Exactly. Yeah. But you're right. Maybe your cousin is right. Maybe it is just women being very comfortable and
Yeah.
empowered. And whenever a group is empowered, you can sort of throw around more muscle or throw around more.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so maybe it's that. It doesn't help. Yeah, that we are at a time where that sort of language is allowed and encouraged, and yet the police, the way we police young men and boys language, not just about, the opposite sex, but about themselves, is
Mm,
just at an all-time high. And that's when you throw around this word again, toxic masculinity, as a way to sort of fence in the things you do not like about men, right?
hmm.
And I think you're right. I think when they came up with this topic, toxic masculinity, they didn't really come up with the other side. They just knew that they knew it when they saw it, right? This idea of toxic masculinity, and all of a sudden that term got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where almost anything that someone does, you can make an argument that it's toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah, yeah, and somehow inherent to their masculine nature, when really
Yeah.
it's just the fact that they're an a-hole and
Right.
not because they're a man. And I think that I do think part of the reason toxic masculinity catches on is that men experience a lot of toxic masculinity from
True.
other men. Like, men are
That's
very
true.
familiar with the traits of
True.
toxic
That's true.
masculinity, right?
Yeah.
I think that if anything, we might be even more so because you spend time in like male locker rooms, right?
Totally.
And that's like where toxic masculinity kind of like comes out and runs rampant.
I work with cops, Julian,
Yeah,
we give those guys
exactly.
guns. Yeah. And
So it definitely is a thing. I just think that the biggest problem is that there's no other way to describe masculinity besides that, and there's no alternative.
maybe
And
it's the assumption that masculinity or men are like this out of control hormone sort of driven, animal machine,
yeah.
and sure, if you look at the history,
Yeah.
some of that holds up, right? But
Mhm.
I think that the fallacy is that that's the only track, right? That men are full, just, you know id, right?
Mhm.
Or and the fact that people evolve, and people evolve as they get older too, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I mean, not only does testosterone drop after a certain point, but this idea of the entire patriarchy is horrible and bad. Well, no, like, grandfathers, fathers, they have wisdom, right? And they have
Mhm.
institutional knowledge. And yes, I do look at my dad and my grandfather, and yes, they have outdated ideas, right? And obviously, their ideas are not going to be the ones that we take to make rules for our society, even though right now that's what's happening, right? But they still have an ability to grow. Men today have an ability, young men especially, if you point them to the right in the right direction, have an ability to not be, you know. And I think if you look at the data, not only are they swinging to the right, but I think they're also a little bit less promiscuous.
Mhm.
Gen Z,
Mhm.
they value sort of commitment a little bit more. So there's a lot there that's not just I'm turning more conservative, but also I think there's hope in the fact that if you show up to the places, to the podcasts they listen to the TV shows they watch, to the seminars that they go to, young men are really yearning for direction and purpose, right? And they will
Mhm.
go
Mhm.
to whoever shows up for them, you know.
Mhm.
and I think that's where we go, right? And if we do meet them there, what do we tell them, right? What do the Democrats say to pull them back, sort of on this side? Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it bears mentioning that, I listed these statistics that are affecting young men, and a lot of similarly bad stats are affecting young women. Like, young women are also experiencing higher levels of social isolation than their mothers and grandmothers, right? And their mental health rates are worsening compared to previous generations. And so I think society wide, you're experiencing some of these factors. And on a different podcast, maybe we can get into why, technology and culture and other things have created a more isolated society with lost meaning for our youth. But it's particularly affecting young men more. And I think we have to figure out, like, Democrats have to figure out a way to get young men to buy into, feminism, but really equality for both genders, all genders, because it does create a better society, right? It's not just about lifting women up. It's a big part of lifting women up, but it's also that it's going to lift men up. And I
Right.
think that if you can explain to them that we're not out to punish you, it's not just about, like, Me Too isn't just about getting rid of men. It's about getting rid of bad actors, but also
Right.
needs to elevate good actors, right? I think that's what the Keanu Sans was. You know what I mean by the Keanu Sans, where like
I
Keanu
do.
Reeves
Yes.
was
Yes. Yes.
photographed. The Keanu Sans, for those that are uninitiated, is when Keanu Reeves, the actor in The Matrix and John Wick, and just an American gem, uh, was photographed with all these pictures where he would create like an un I don't know, a more than necessary distance between his
Yes.
hands and
Yes.
his female
Yes.
fans body parts, so he's
Yeah.
like kind of hovering outside of
True.
their waistlines
Yeah.
when he's taking pictures with them. And people were like, wow, like, this guy is just amazing. He's like the opposite of, I guess, Harvey Weinstein.
Again, for just a little bit of space.
Yeah, just a little bit of space. And it's like, yeah, we need more of that. We need to be
Yeah.
able to say, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, there are people doing it right, and they deserve to be. I mean, you don't need to stand and clap, but you should at least recognize that, uh, some, not all men are this way, not even most men.
Right.
A quick side story: I had a friend one time, and this is a humble brag, but I had a friend one time tell me that, like, she found it really, she was so grateful that, like, I wasn't like a creep. I
Mm.
don't know.
Mm.
Like, I was just like a normal, pleasant person to, I guess, talk to or be around as a man. And, you know, another friend was like, yeah, but, like, we don't need to be rewarded for that. And I was like, yeah, that's true. We don't need to be rewarded for that. But
No. No.
it doesn't hurt to mention
No.
it now and again.
Yes. That's right.
Like,
I mean,
a
that's
couple
all.
words of encouragement to young men,
Yeah.
I think, can go a
Exactly.
long way.
Exactly. It's all about. Yeah, because if what you hear, in the media or in the movies, or is that you are, you are gross and you're disgusting and all your thoughts are gross and everything you do, is um. I mean, it's and yeah, there's really no light at the end of that tunnel, right? There's okay, then what am I supposed to do? I guess I'm not going to go outside and talk to people because that's going to end up a disaster. And so I'm going to go on Reddit or go on whatever and go inside my rabbit hole of my interests. And this is my happy place. And I'm going to make my own world. And in that world, I'm the hero, right? And I do have meaning. And then it becomes scary, right? Because the more you sort of divorce yourself from a society that you perceive as hostile, the more you're going to be hostile to it. And when there comes an opportunity to sort of make your voice heard, it's going to be a bitter voice, and and I think back on the election of Barack Obama, and he was cool, like
Mhm.
I feel like his. I mean, no one called he was sort of, well, at least to some people, he was sort of the cool, calm, collected, intellectual black guy, right? And so he kind of had a little bit of everything going for him in terms of like, okay, he's definitely a man, he's a family man. Also, no scandals, right?
Hmm.
At least no sexual scandals. And 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 also in this election, you had Donald Trump versus Tim Walz, and Tim Walz was sort of pushed as like, oh look, he's the example of masculinity we want. He's a former soldier. He's a football coach. And again, like that was good. I think that was a little too late. A
Yeah.
lot of people are talking about Tim Walz as a very strong contender for the primary that will probably happen.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
we'll see if framing him, putting him as the good version of masculinity, how that goes. You know,
Hmm.
but yeah,
So
I yeah,
let me ask you a question as we sort of close off here. Like, Democrats can win back young men if they do what?
yeah. No, I do think that they can. I think number one is showing them that Donald Trump was not the big bad man in charge. That he's a bumbling old fool, right? That texts out war plans to reporters. And I mean, look at Pete Hetzeg, right? Like, if you look at a
Yeah.
picture of him, this is how Trump chose him, right? Like, he looks all American, right? Like, he looks like he should be a general, right? But he's a
Hmm.
fool. He's a drunken idiot, right? And who like fires off emojis when he fires off missiles. Like, he's like not, and in a way, like, he does represent this hollow version of an American man, right? This idea of like gunpowder and flags and hot dogs, but that's it, right? And there's really no I mean, it was the emblem of an American man was like the family man, right? Which is why Republicans ran people like John McCain and Romney, right? Like
Hmm.
the wise sort of vet, or the wise businessman, right? And that's religious, and that's a good moral man, right?
Hmm.
They've obviously gone away with that
Abandoned
playbook,
that.
yeah. And we have the Matt Gates and the Pete Hetzegs and the Donald Trumps, right? And
I guess JD Vance is like their stand-in for that guy.
yeah, and oh my God, we can go on and on about him and his obsession with masculinity, with reproduction, right? He's
Yeah, it's
obsessed
very,
with
very weird.
families. He was convinced that the good gays were going to vote for him, right? And for the Republicans, and this idea that gay men are, there's polite gays, right? That sort of are not out in the streets, doing pride or whatever, and they can look like me, like with the ties. I guess I don't know what he's talking about, but
You're one of the good ones,
I'm
Anthony.
one of the
You're
good
one of
ones apparently. And but also, he's a very strange just man. He wears eyeliner, I think. He looks like he wears eyeliner.
the He looks like he does.
He
I
does, and
don't
he's went to Harvard. He's very soft, but he's also like from the people. He's very confusing. And but but I do think that if Democrats show up, present this message of, our message is for I honestly think we go with the economic angle, right? Like, you know, the Republican Party is not the party of the middle class at all. Like, these
know.
less than 100 days, life has not gotten better for the average American man or woman, right? So I think we seize on that anger, and we stop with the demonization of the American, like, young man. This idea, no, you're not, this disgusting hormone. You're a person. Yes, you have needs. They're just as important as your female counterparts, right? You are just
Yeah.
as important. Um, and yes, there has been a historical disparity, but that's not necessarily your fault, you know.
Hmm.
And be part of the solution, and and bring him into this larger sort of community of change. And Yeah, and putting up candidates that do speak to those things. Maybe Tim Walz. I don't know. Maybe. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. I think they have to thread the needle of acknowledging young men's pain while also not discounting the historical disparities that have existed for women, and convince both genders, both sexes, that we care about you, you're equally important, and we want you to succeed. And then backing that up with a candidate that can represent that, and a platform that can speak to that, that says, like, you know, you don't necessarily have to do only men things to be successful in America, or you
Right.
don't have to do only women things to be successful in America, right? So I think one of the policy proposals that I really love is, like, making college education not a requirement for government jobs in
Mm,
large
mm,
capacity. And this was really popular in Pennsylvania, and they've Kamala adopted it on her party platform. And I think that's, like, huge. I mean, if you're looking at young men graduating college less,
yeah.
like, maybe you can stop requiring college education to do jobs that don't necessarily need it. Doesn't mean that you might not
Yeah.
still hire college educated people over non-college, but it shouldn't be a
Yeah.
barrier rather than an opportunity.
I saw a billboard here in Oakland and called that exact same thing the paper ceiling, right? Like, we need to break the paper ceiling. Right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and I
that's
think framing it that way as a civil rights issue, I mean, it's definitely an opportunity issue, right? And yeah, and I think whatever steps the Democrats can make to show that they are once again the party of opportunity, right? And and the fact that we don't, you know, I know that Democrats don't hate traditional families, but um, the Republicans hit us hard with the trans issue, right? They hit us really
mhm,
hard with the trans issue, and it worked because the situation here on the field in this last election was disaffected young men, and I mean that is just, I mean, when the nerve is exposed, they really tap that nerve of, you know, I don't know what it is. We're getting replaced, or masculinity is literally being redefined. You
mhm,
know, um, not only academically and not only, you know, the way in the comments of videos, and not only in the way of, like, I am being ashamed for being, you should be ashamed for just being a man. And then the Republicans say, hey, and look, the Democrats also believe in trans rights and trans people, right? Those same people that are telling you should be ashamed of a man are now lifting, what we think are not real people, right? Because they're not in the
mhm,
Bible, right? And so
yeah,
it does, in a person that's isolated and afraid, that sort of hate is very, very logical and very, very attractive, right? And maybe if they think, if I vote for a candidate that believes, that trans rights are not rights, then maybe I'll feel better about being a man this way, you know.
mhm,
And I think they're going to find out, no, oppressing an actual oppressed group doesn't justify, you know, some very real slippage on your part, right? And you are worse off than your parents were, but it's
yeah,
not trans people's fault, and it's not it's not immigrants' fault. It
yeah,
is a larger sort of economic systemic problem that we can address, and you need to be on board with us.
yeah. And I think that argument can be made, right? Because, when you actually poll Gen Z and Gen Alpha and young millennials, you see that they're really not misogynistic in their thinking.
Mm,
They really don't believe at their core that women are less intelligent than men, or
right,
less capable at doing most jobs than men. And so we have, I think, in a large way, moved past those old conventions. They just want to know why their lives suck, and they're
right,
willing to find any scapegoat, really, I
right.
think, to if it means that their lives can be improved. But just like any group wants a scapegoat to explain their pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're not trying to convince people that, like, don't think women can read, that like suddenly they should be lawyers. You're convincing teenagers that, like, yeah, actually your problem is that the older generation took all your wealth, not
Right.
the women.
Right. Right. Exactly. Hmm.
Anyway, I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
I guess this is our sign off. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of The Elephant. I guess I'm supposed to ask people to like and subscribe. I
Yes, you
haven't
are.
gotten to that level of
That's
sophistication
you
yet.
totally are.
So, but thanks for listening. Anthony, thanks
Of
for
course.
hopping on. I'll see you next time.
Yes. Bye bye.